The first item of business this afternoon is portfolio questions. I would like to get as many people as possible in, so short and succinct questions would be appreciated. And the first portfolio question brief is social security and older people. Question number 1, Colin Beattie.
To ask the Scottish Government what impact UK Government welfare reforms have had on the Scottish social security spending.
Shirley Somerville.
The Scottish Government's 2019 Welfare Reform Report found that welfare reforms since 2015 could reduce social security spending in Scotland by around £500 million per year when universal credit is fully rolled out. This is the impact of the benefit freeze, the reductions in universal credit, work allowance and the two-child limit. These cuts only build upon a yet larger cut set by the UK Government's welfare reforms introduced since 2010. In our 2018 Welfare Reform Report, previously estimated that those total cuts since 2010 would reduce annual social security spending by a massive £3.7 billion per year by 2020-2021.
Colin Beattie.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for her response. Can the Cabinet Secretary confirm how much the Scottish Government spends on mitigating harmful UK Government policies? And does the Cabinet Secretary agree with the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty and Human Rights, Professor Philip Alston, when he wrote that mitigation comes at a price and is not sustainable?
Shirley Somerville.
Well, I very much agree with Professor Alston and his recent reports. Unfortunately, the scale of the UK Government social security cuts is so vast that it is not possible for the Scottish Government to mitigate against them in full, especially given our resource block grant has been reduced by £2 billion in real terms since 2010-2011. Nonetheless, the Scottish Government this year is continuing to invest over £100 million to mitigate against the worst impacts of the UK Government welfare reforms. This is part of an estimated £1.4 billion we are investing in 2019 to support low-income households.
Question number 2, James Kelly.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government what its response is to the Social Security Committee's recommendation that universal credit housing element should be paid directly to a landlord by default with the option of a tenant to opt out.
Shirley Somerville.
As stated in my answer to Jackie Bailey on the 26th of June, the Scottish Government worked directly with people in receipt of universal credit when developing the Universal Credit Scottish Choices. The feedback received was that people wished to have a choice about whether or not the housing cost in their Universal Credit Award was paid directly to their landlord. Almost 50% of the people who have been offered choices have taken up one or both. In other words, people have had the flexibility to decide for themselves whether it works better for them to have their housing costs paid directly to their landlord or not.
James Kelly.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. Research-based Citizens Advice Scotland has shown rent arrears have shot up by 40% since 2012, and that's why the Social Security Committee heard evidence that paying the rent direct to landlords with the opt-out for tenants was, in their words, a no-brainer. Can I ask the Cabinet Secretary to confirm whether officials have assessed the social return on investment of £2.50 is paid for each flexibility, and if the experienced panels have carried out any research in response to the recommendation?
Shirley Somerville.
Well, I do recognise the Social Security Committee's recommendation on this and indeed their wider report. I would point out to James Kelly that this was not the universal view of those who gave written and oral evidence to the committee, although I do recognise the committee's recommendations. As I said in my original answer, this is because we built Scottish Choices by asking people directly in receipt of universal credit what they wanted to see. The experience panels have not looked at this since the Social Security Committee's report, but we are committed as a government to a review of Scottish Choices, and of course I look forward to seeing what those with the lived experience of universal credit will say about the choices that we have on offer, and then we can act on that accordingly.
Supplementary from Claire Adamson.
Officer, a recent Trussell Trust report found that food banks experienced a 30% increase in demand in areas where universal credit had been in place for a year. Does the Cabinet Secretary think it's time the UK Government listened to the overwhelming evidence about the hardship universal credit is causing fix the flaws in the system, starting with the 5-week delay for new claimants?
Shirley Somerville.
Well, I do think that the UK Government needs to look very urgently at universal credit, although they have spectacularly failed to do so to date. There are a number of significant problems with universal credit. Claire Addison is quite right to point out the impact of the 5-week wait, something which is being seen to have an impact, given recent reports on to rent arrears. The minimum 5-week wait before receiving that first payment, together with the direct deductions as a result of loans from the DWP, is the single biggest problems that people are having with the receipt of universal credit. And I would urge, as I have done with our predecessors, the new Secretary of State for Department of Work and Pensions, to listen to that evidence and act upon it.
Question number 3, Fulton McGregor.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government how many children will be taken out of poverty by the Scottish Child Payment.
Shirley Somerville.
Once fully rolled out by the end of 2022, the Scottish Child Payment is expected to lift 30,000 children out of poverty, reducing relative child poverty by 3 percentage points. It will also help stop families falling into poverty and mitigate some of the worst effects of the UK Government's welfare cuts. The first payments for under-6s will be made before Christmas 2020. Along with our wider actions set out in the Tackling Child Poverty Delivery Plan, the Scottish Child Payment sets Scotland apart as the only country in the UK taking concerted action to ultimately eradicate child poverty.
Fulton McGregor.
Thank you. I welcome the Cabinet Secretary's response and the announcement in the programme for government that the new benefit will be introduced early for the most vulnerable children, which includes many in my constituency of Coatbridge and Chryson. Can the Cabinet Secretary confirm that the Scottish Child Payment will not have any cap on the number of eligible children in a family, unlike the UK Government's callous 2-child cap and rape clause?
Shirley Somerville.
Well, yes, I can absolutely confirm that there will never be any cap on the number of eligible children in a family for the Scottish Child Payment or indeed any other social security payment. Numerous independent projections published over the last year have shown that child poverty is set to rise in Scotland as a result of the UK Government's continued welfare cut, particularly as a result of policies such as the 2-child cap and the benefits freeze. Policies like that should always be opposed for the hardship they cause and the impact they have on families and child poverty, and they run absolutely counter to the principles of dignity, fairness and respect on which the social security system in Scotland is based.
Supplementary from Pauline McNeill.
Given that the Fiscal Commission believes that the take-up of the Best Start grant will be at best 69% but could be as low as 45%, does the Cabinet Secretary agree that moving towards an automated payment, if that could be achieved, would substantially reduce the barriers and would make deeper inroads into child poverty?
Shirley Somerville.
Well, I do recognise Pauline McNeill's continued commitment to ensuring that we do all we can up here in Scotland around automated payments, and I recognise that. We did look very seriously at this issue when we were looking at how to achieve the Scottish Child Payment, but we settled on the approach that we have of an application-based process because it offers a more timely and efficient model for delivery. It simply would not have been possible for us to be able to put in the Scottish Child Payment within the timescales that we've already announced, and I didn't want to see a delay, nor did Aileen Campbell, who we have been working jointly in the Scottish Child Payment about, and that's the reasons behind that. But of course, if there's anything more we can do in the longer term around automation, social security in general, as I've said to Pauline McNeill in the past, I'd be more than happy to look at that.
Question number 4, Ruth Maguire.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what the impact will be on mixed-age couples in Scotland of the UK Government's decision to exempt them from claiming pension credit.
Shirley Somerville.
Well, I am deeply concerned about this regressive policy which punishes older people for having a younger partner. The Scottish Government estimates that this change could lead to an annual loss of as much as £7,000 per household, and by 2023-24 could affect as many as 5,600 households in Scotland. And this isn't just about the money, as Age Scotland has quite rightly pointed out. This can have a devastating impact on the health and well-being of some older people as they struggle to pay the bills and heat their homes.
Ruth Maguire.
Thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. Nearly 6,000 households in my Ayrshire constituency are not getting the pension credit that they're entitled to. The UK Government admits that UK-wide a staggering £3.5 billion earmarked for the poorest pensioners doesn't reach them. Does the Cabinet Secretary support the charity Independent Age's calls on the UK Government to reform pension credit to make sure everyone who's entitled to it receives their money?
Shirley Somerville.
Well, I would absolutely concur with the remarks from Ruth Maguire. It's absolutely imperative that we do all that we can to increase the benefit take-up. Now, the Scottish Government will do that for the benefits that are devolved, but there is an absolute responsibility on the UK Government to also actively encourage take-up, something that they have failed to do so in the past. Ruth Maguire is quite right to point out that £3.5 billion is being lost. That affects 1.3 million households that are entitled to pension credit but are not receiving it. This is not a new problem, and the UK Government must be urged to act to ensure that those who are entitled to benefits receive that money.
Question number 5, Edward Mountain.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what action it is taking to support people in the Highlands and Islands who are experiencing social isolation and loneliness.
Christina McKelvey.
It's important that our work to address social isolation and loneliness is inclusive of rural communities. Over the summer, I spent time in Skye in the Western Highlands, where I had the pleasure of visiting a number of important projects working to tackle social isolation and loneliness, including Rag and Tag Textiles in Broadfoot and Fort William Men's Sheds. These projects are working tirelessly to build communities and support individuals, and it was a joy and a privilege to be able to spend time with them. We know that rural communities can face particular challenges around social isolation and loneliness, and we have engaged with the key stakeholders in Scottish Rural Action and Scotland's National Rural Mental Health Forum as part of our wider work to build a more connected Scotland. I would like to reassure the member that particular challenges faced by the Highlands and Islands and of course other rural parts of Scotland will form a very important part of our work going forward.
Edward Mountain.
I thank the Minister for that answer. Minister, Highland Befrienders play a vital role in tackling loneliness and social exclusion. The problem is the only money they have been awarded by the Scottish Government runs out in March next year. Can the Minister give me an undertaking that she will assess the feasibility of longer-term funding so that organisations like Highland Befrienders can continue to establish communities and provide the invaluable support they do at the moment?
Christina McKelvey.
I'd be absolutely delighted to give Mr Mountain that reassurance. The Social Isolation and Loneliness Strategy Fund, which is about £1 million, we are already working with the implementation group to look at how we can roll that out and meet the ambitions of the strategy. But he would probably like to know that we've already spent some of that money. We gave about a month ago, or maybe earlier this month, about £80,000 to Befriended Networks to do exactly the work that Mr Mountain has just mentioned. We're absolutely committed to looking across all of the investments into communities with a view of maximising alignment with the strategy. But we do have some money here, which is unusual, Presiding Officer. We have started spending some of it, and we started with Befriended Networks because we knew exactly the value of their work.
Question number 6, David Torrance.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what information it has regarding how many families in Scotland have been denied entitlement to benefits due to a two-child limit.
Shirley-Anne Somerville.
The Scottish Government's 2019 Welfare Reform Report shows that, according to the latest statistics, over 8,500 families across Scotland had been denied entitlement for at least one of their children by April 2019. The report has also estimated that around 3,400 of these households were headed by a lone parent. Over time, more and more families will be affected by the limits and the appalling rape clause. The 2019 Welfare Reform Report estimated that the two-child limit could reduce social security spending by £120 million per year in the long run, affecting around 40,000 households.
David Torrance.
In my constituency, Kirkcaldy Food Bank has seen unprecedented levels of demand over the last 12 months. Does the Cabinet Secretary agree that this uncaring, out-of-touch UK Tory government continues to attack the most vulnerable in our society through universal credit? And can Cabinet Secretary explain what steps the Scottish Government is taking to mitigate these actions?
Shirley-Anne Somerville.
The Scottish Government considers it unacceptable that families have been forced to resort to food banks. The Trussell Trust published research last week noting that in some areas excuse me, Presiding Officer, where universal credit has been in operation for more than 2 years, food bank demand has increased by as much as 48%. I will continue to call on the UK Government to listen to this and other evidence, as I've said, to halt the ongoing migration of people onto universal credit and to fix the problems we all know about, as well as taking action on the wider punitive measures, such as the two-child cap. We are investing over £100 million this year to help mitigate against the worst of the impacts of the UK Government's benefit cuts. This is part of an overall £1.4 billion, which I mentioned earlier, of spending which we are investing to support low-income households.
Supplementary from Mark Griffin.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Is the Cabinet Secretary able to say whether the Social Security Scotland Agency is collecting data from the Best Start baby payment on third and subsequent children in a family? Because that data would be extremely valuable if this administration or any other administration decided to support those families with 3 or 4 children who are missing out because of the UK government's callous cap.
Shirley Somerville.
Well, as part of the Best Start application forms, applicants can include details of other children so that we can assure that if they are eligible for other parts of the Best Start grant payments, that they will also be given that money. So the Scottish Social Security Agency is looking very seriously at ensuring that we maximise the take-up of the Best Start grant, and that involves knowing potentially about the other children that are in the house if the applicant wishes to do that. Of course, if any government was to wish to mitigate against the effect of the 2-child limit, they would, of course, have to, as I said in my original answer, meet the costs of the £120 million that this policy would cost. We are, of course, not simply mitigating against that 2-child limit. We have, of course, gone even further with the introduction of our Scottish Child Payment by Christmas 2020.
Question number 7, Alison Harris.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government to provide an update on the timeline for the devolution of the social security powers set out in the Social Security Scotland Act 2018.
Shirley Somerville.
The sections of the Social Security Scotland Act 2018 will be commenced as and when appropriate in order to ensure a safe and secure transition of powers. I set out a timeline for delivery of the remaining devolved benefits in February this year. The Cabinet Secretary for Communities and Local Government set out in June our assumptions on how the new Scottish Child Payment will affect this timeline, and I will update Parliament shortly on our work since June with those assumptions.
Alison Harris.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for her answer. As you said, in June, Aileen Campbell said the Scottish Child Payment would have implications on the delivery of other aspects of the Social Security programme. The Social Security Programme Director recently said that his team do not know if they can hold to the dates provided by Aileen Campbell for several benefits, and that feasibility work on timescales around the Scottish Child Payment has yet to be finalised. So may I ask if the Scottish Child Payment has caused any knock-on delays to disability benefits, carer benefits or transfers, and can we be sure that there will be no further delays given the current team seem unsure if or when they can deliver the results?
Shirley Somerville.
Well, I can absolutely assure Alison Harris that the current team and this government is determined to deliver on the devolution of the disability payments and, of course, with the delivery of the Scottish Child Payment. We did have to make timetables changes because we will introduce the Scottish Child Payment. That is inevitable because of the introduction of such a major policy, and radical action did require those changes to be made. Those were difficult decisions, but I hope Parliament and wider stakeholders will appreciate why we have done this. As I said in my original answer, Aileen Campbell set out in June the implications for the rest of the devolved benefits to come here. We are working to test those assumptions. I will update Parliament on our final assessments, but I can say at this point that work is going well on this, and I hope to be able to update Parliament very soon on the finer details of that. But Alison Harris can be assured that that work is ongoing and being treated very seriously.
Question number 8, Alexander Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what progress Social Security Scotland is making with the IT infrastructure for Wave 2 benefits.
Shirley Somerville.
The Scottish Government is making good progress on scaling the existing Wave 1 technology and systems for Wave 2 benefits to introduce more capability, to continue to provide a consistent multi-channel experience for our clients, and to ensure, above all, that they are paid on time, every time.
Alexander Stewart.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that response. In July, there were some concerns that internal knowledge management system, which supports and supplies staff with policy documents, benefit information and eligibility criteria and links to legislation, was causing issues for staff at Social Security Scotland. Can I ask the Cabinet Secretary how these concerns have been addressed?
Shirley Somerville.
Well, they're addressed because we recognise that we will continuously build on what we've achieved in Wave 1 to be able to deliver what we're looking to do on Wave 2. The way that the entirety of the devolution of social security has been set up is to ensure that what we are doing lays the foundations for the more complex work. That is an agile process that will be iterative over time. So that work is going exactly as the programme intended, to ensure that we're building on those strong foundations. And just as we have delivered successfully on Wave 1, I am absolutely confident we will do so on Wave 2.
That concludes portfolio questions on social security and older people, and we will move on to portfolio questions on finance, economy and fair work. Question number 1, Jamie Green.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what its responses to the new CBI Scotland and KPMG Scottish Productivity Index, which reportedly shows productivity as starting a lap behind competitors.
Derek Mackay.
The index and associated report are positive and constructive contributions to the debate on raising Scotland's rate of productivity growth. It is encouraging that the report's recommendations are broadly in line with Scottish Government policy. Scotland is making progress on productivity. The historic gap between Scotland and the UK has reduced in recent years. Between 2007 and 2018, Scotland's productivity growth was higher than any other country or region of the UK, including London. However, the Scottish Government is far from complacent and will continue to pursue higher productivity growth through our Economic Action Plan and related commitments.
Jamie Green.
Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that update? The opening lines of the report state that Scottish productivity hasn't really shifted for decades, and they don't expect drastic changes in the near term. And given that in 9 out of 15 key areas that the report analysed, including skills, training and well-being, Scotland is falling far behind the rest of the UK. So can I ask the Cabinet Secretary if the Scottish Government will formally respond to the report, if it will act on any of the specific recommendations that it makes, and more generally, if he's more positive about Scotland's productivity prospects than the CBI is?
Derek Mackay.
Well, I'm equally positive because I was at the launch with CBI and other partners such as KPMG and businesses who welcomed the government's response. So I think Jamie Green would do well to share my positivity and positive approach. Now, I have to say some of the economic indicators that were mentioned were subsequent to a UK indeed in global financial crash. That gives some of the explanation why we've been through a particular economic cycle that we have. And of course, it's the current threat of Brexit that's threatening our current economic indicators, which over the most recent piece have been outperforming the rest of the UK, whether that was record low unemployment, soaring exports, progress on productivity, and even GDP growth in some quarters that outperformed the rest of the United Kingdom. So it is actually some of these economic indicators are on the turn because of the decisions and the incompetence of the UK government. In relation to productivity, of course I'll respond. I've already done so. But again, Jamie Green has possibly missed the response from the Scottish Government, and we'll have more to say through the course of the Scottish Budget and the refreshing of the Economic Action Plan. So as I say, I welcome the recommendations, I welcome the constructive approach, I welcome the new indicators to show how we can tackle productivity, but surely the Conservatives also recognise UK government has a role, and so does business itself. Business itself has a role to play in enhancing productivity, but we're certainly a willing partner in that shared journey.
Short supplementary, please, from Neil Finlay.
Could the Minister point to any area of government policy, economic policy, that might be failing, that he accepts responsibility for?
Derek Mackay.
You know, I think the opposition, it's perfectly open to them to try and pick on our record, but it's really disappointing that when the greatest threat to Scotland's economy right now is a no-deal Brexit that could bring about a recession in the UK and Scotland to catastrophic effect, Neil Finlay chooses to attack the SNP. It just tells you the priorities of the Labour Party in Scotland right now.
Question number 2, Liz Smith.
To ask the Scottish Government how much of the £1.2 billion of recent Barnett consequential funding will be allocated to education.
Kate Forbes.
Consequentials received after the UK spending round for next year will be allocated through the Scottish budget process. And of course, any additional funding is to be welcomed and will be spent wisely, but it won't reverse the damage done by a decade of UK government austerity, which is now being compounded by the threat of a no-deal Brexit.
Liz Smith.
Could I thank the Minister for that response? Given the ongoing concerns across Scotland about teacher shortages, including those that were mentioned by the Cabinet Secretary for Education's own International Council of Education Advisors and those cited in today's published survey of head teachers, could I ask the Minister what discussions she is having with the Cabinet Secretary for Education about addressing these shortages in key subjects and in additional support for learning?
Kate Forbes.
Well, as you can imagine, the Deputy First Minister will have a number of conversations as we go through the Scottish Government's budget process. And of course, if Liv Smith feels that passionate about any line in the budget, then she and her party are welcome to engage constructively in the budget process. The Scottish Government does not ring-fence consequentials according to UK Government decisions. We set our own priorities for the people of Scotland, and the value of that is seen in the fact that school spending per pupil is consistently higher in Scotland than in other UK countries.
Supplementary, James Dornan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Minister, just 21 days ago, Liz Smith at First Minister's Questions stated the consequentials coming to the Scottish Government amounted to 1.9 billion. Today, our question states that's 700 million lower. Doesn't this just highlight again that you should always wait and see the colour of the Tories' money before you start spending it?
Kate Forbes. I couldn't agree with James Dornan more, because of course the money that Liz Smith is referring to is going to be agreed after this year's spending round, and we of course await receipt of that money before we decide how it's going to be allocated.
Question number 3, Alex Rowley.
To ask the Scottish Government whether trade union access and the promotion of collective bargaining as set out in the Fair Work First principles are conditions for companies receiving government financial support, including grants from enterprise agencies.
Jamie Hepburn.
Through Fair Work First, the Scottish Government is attaching conditionality to as many grants, funding streams and public contracts as we can by the end of this Parliament. Fair Work First will ask employers to commit to investment in skills and training, payment of the real living wage, no inappropriate use of zero-hours contracts, action to tackle the gender pay gap, and in relation to Mr Rowley's question, genuine workforce engagement.
Alex Rowley.
Presiding Officer, the Government seemed to have difficulty in giving us a straight answer to that question. Colin Smith yesterday asked if the RMT's collective bargaining agreement would continue in place with the Northern Isles ferry service and didn't get a straight answer. The trade unions have been writing to ministers and failing to get a straight answer. An essential part of the Fair Work First principle as set out by the Scottish Government is that there will be trade union access and support for collective bargaining agreements. Is the Government absolutely clear about that, and are they making clear that that's a condition of any public funding going into any company in Scotland? It's quite a straightforward question.
Jamie Hepburn.
Well, I find it an odd question. I was very clear in relation to the points I've set out. We've published our Fair Work Action Plan, which sets out the great importance we place on the principles laid out by the Independent Fair Work Convention around genuine workplace engagement. Yes, I think trade union representation and collective bargaining is an important element of that activity. We are currently taking forward our Fair Work First agenda. We are working with partners to ensure it is rolled out right now. We are engaging with a range of early adopters who are committed to the Fair Work agenda, but also will continue to work with the STUC, the Fair Work Convention. Indeed, if Mr Rowley is particularly keen to discuss this matter with me, I don't think he's contacted me directly hitherto, then I'd be very happy to speak to him directly about it.
Question number 5, Claire Adamson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what it is doing to encourage diversity in the workplace.
Jamie Hepburn.
The Scottish Government is committed to increasing diversity in the workplace as part of our ambition for inclusive growth. We aim to encourage diversity in the workplace through the implementation of the actions across a range of activity, including the Fair Work Action Plan, a Fairer Scotland for Disabled People Employment Action Plan, a Fairer Scotland for Women Gender Pay Gap Action Plan, and the Race Equality Action Plan. These actions, which include extending the Workplace Equality Fund and promoting benefits of diversity within the Scottish Business Pledge, will help to make Scotland a better, fairer place to live and work.
Claire Adamson.
Thank you. Does the Minister agree with me that schemes such as the Career Coalition for Racial Equality and Rights, Parliamentary Shadowing Scheme and also the disability internship programmes in the Parliament are an excellent way to engage with underrepresented groups in our workforce, and would the Minister encourage other members like me to take part in these activities?
Jamie Hepburn.
Yes, I would. I have taken part in these programmes in the past as well. Presiding Officer, I have found them to be invaluable to me. I hope those who have participated in the programmes as well, working with me, have found them useful too. I think they are of great benefit. That's why the Government provides funding to the Equal Representation Coalition to do things such as produce a toolkit to help political parties improve the diversity of their membership. That's why we fund Inclusion Scotland to operate internships in the Scottish Government. That's why I would encourage others to take part in the Career Shadowing Scheme, as Claire Adamson and I and other members have done in the past.
Short supplementary, please, from Rhoda Grant.
Can I ask how the Scottish Government can encourage diversity when their own agency, Marine Scotland, aided by their own personnel department, the Scottish Government's own personnel department, continue to abuse my constituent, a whistleblower who stood up against abusive sexist behaviour in a male-dominated workplace? This case alone discourages women from applying for work in male-dominated sectors.
Jamie Hepburn.
Well, I'm not going to comment on the specific issue because I believe that could be subject to ongoing activity, and I don't think the Presiding Officer or anyone else would want me to do that. But I have laid out the range of activity that we are utterly serious about in relation to the Fair Work Action Plan, the activity we're undertaking in relation to at least halving the disability employment gap, the Gender Pay Gap Action Plan, the Race Equality Action Plan. This is an agenda we're very serious on.
To avoid confusion, I should have noted earlier that question 4 wasn't lodged. Therefore, we're now on to question 6. Patrick Harvey.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what criteria Scottish Enterprise uses to determine the appropriateness of its exclusivity agreements with developers and how such agreements can be challenged.
Derek Mackay.
All property and land transactions undertaken by Scottish Enterprise are governed by the Scottish Public Finance Manual and are also subject to their own internal governance processes. Exclusivity agreements are commonplace in the property industry and are considered by Scottish Enterprise on a case-by-case basis, as I say, with reference to the Scottish Public Finance Manual. As an exclusivity agreement is a contract between 2 or more parties, anyone considering a challenge to such a contract would need to seek the appropriate legal advice.
Patrick Harvey.
Thank you. I'm sure the Cabinet Secretary is aware of the specific example of Flamingo Land's proposed development at Loch Lomond, which has seen nearly 60,000 objections, making it the most unpopular planning application in Scottish history. And yet, despite this application having now been withdrawn in the face of such huge, widespread opposition, the community are not able to pursue other alternatives, such as a community-owned option, because of the exclusivity agreement that Scottish Enterprise have. Surely that community should have other options than having to go to court. Surely they should be in the driving seat in determining what is the future of that site.
Derek Mackay.
Well, to be fair, Patrick Harvey did ask me in general terms and I replied in those general terms, but speaking specifically about the proposition in question, I'm sure I heard Jackie Bailey ask a question of the First Minister about the possibility of public ownership and community buyout, which, if I remember correctly, the First Minister said that should be explored, and I certainly concur with that proposition. Of course, ministers can prejudice any planning application or indeed interfere with that operational independence of Scottish Enterprise in relation to a matter that might be live. So let me say this. Of course, without prejudice to any planning application, everyone should reflect, everyone without prejudice, Every planning application should be considered on the merits of the case and the appropriate planning material considerations, but everyone involved in this should maybe reflect on the outcomes and also on the public opinion and the level of objections that were generated. And I hope that's helpful for everyone's understanding.
Question number 7, Rona Mackay.
To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on the number of employers paying the living wage.
Jamie Hepburn.
As of the 19th September 2019, there are 1,586 living wage accredited employers in Scotland, proportionately over 5 times more than the rest of the UK. And in total, 80.6% of all employees in Scotland now receive the real living wage, ahead of England at 77.1%, Wales at 74% and Northern Ireland at 72.3%, the best performing of all the UK nations.
Rona Mackay.
Thank the Minister for that answer. Those figures are really encouraging, but it still amounts to around about 20% of people working in Scotland not receiving the living wage. Does the Minister agree that every responsible employer should pay this, as the clue is in the title, living wage?
Jamie Hepburn.
Yes, the Scottish Government are great advocates for the real living wage. That's why we were the first accredited government across these islands. I would agree with the point that Ms Mackay has made. Yes, it's welcome that 80% of employees are paid. It is still the case that 20%, 1/5 of the workforce are not paid it, and we want to do better than that. And I would encourage employers to follow the example of those who have become accredited to get on board, to become accredited and make sure they are paying all of their staff at least the real living wage.
Question number 8, Ian Gray.
To ask the Scottish Government how it is supporting the economies of small towns.
Kate Forbes.
We understand the economic challenges faced by businesses in our small towns and are providing a £50 million town centre fund to stimulate growth as part of the wider £5 billion capital infrastructure investment. And our non-domestic rates relief is the most generous in the UK, worth over £750 million, and the small business bonus scheme removes or reduces rates burdens on small businesses across Scotland.
Ian Gray.
And yet, in spite of that, small towns struggle to access funds to regenerate their communities. But it isn't always just about money. Dunbar Community Council recently took me around a number of derelict residential and business properties in their town, which speculators have bought and refused to maintain or to sell, undermining the community's efforts to regenerate the town's economy. How does the Scottish Government intend to address this blight of derelict properties and recalcitrant owners?
Kate Forbes.
I think Ian Gray is right to point out that it's not just about money. In many cases, it's about empowering local communities to take action in those circumstances. And of course, communities were empowered to do so through the Community Empowerment Act. So that, in conjunction with supporting businesses in the centre of towns through our rate system and through our funding and grant system, should hopefully provide the support to Dunbar Community Council that they need.
Supplementary from Murdo Fraser.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The UK Government announced in July a £3.6 billion package of support for town deals in England, which will benefit 100 different communities. Given that there are a number of small towns in Scotland that are facing similar challenges to those south of the border, has the Scottish Government any plans to follow suit and introduce town deals here?
Kate Forbes.
Well, we await further clarity from the UK Government on that specific proposal, but our commitment from the Scottish Government is to ensure that every area of Scotland is covered by a deal, and that includes regional deals, which of course include some of those towns as well. But in this case, we do await further detail from the UK Government.
That concludes portfolio questions on finance and the economy, and we shall move to the next item of business. I'll just give everyone a little time to shift their seats.